So welcome everyone to our 13th session. And in today's session, we're going to be specifically focusing on the quantitative reasoning section of the UCAT exam. We have another 2 sessions left in the next 2 weeks where we'll be focusing on abstract reasoning and situational judgment. So stay tuned for those as well. This is a little bit about our organization. I'm sure you've seen this slide before. This organization is entirely run by medical students. So you know that we've been through the exact same thing a couple of years ago. And so we can really help you out by narrating our personal experiences and telling you about how we overcame personal difficulties that we faced, just like how Yusuf just spoke about how to overcome stress for the UCAT or just with A-levels and stuff in general. And as I've mentioned before, we offer free services such as the weekly workshops and other very affordable services like our personal statement review. You can also book your free consultation now, and I'll be talking more about that at the end of today's presentation. So a little bit more about us. I'm sure you guys know us by now, but my name is Arisma and I'm going into my 2nd year at King's, and I'm an international student from Dubai.
Awesome. Hello, my name's Yusuf and I'm a home student studying at Oxford University and I'm going into my 4th year.
So here are just some of the benefits of joining our weekly workshops. And if you've come to any one of our workshops before, you'll know that we're very interactive and community driven and really help you out with your application. So here's the schedule for the next few weeks. We're doing quantitative reasoning today, and then abstract reasoning, and then situational judgment. At the end of today's session, I've also put in a Slido feedback form for you guys to give us any ideas for what kind of sessions you'd like to see after the UCAT series is over. So if you have any ideas, put them down at the end. And finally, here are the objectives for today's session. This stays pretty standard throughout our UCAT series. First, we're going to look into the quantitative reasoning section and learn more about it. We're then going to understand why the quantitative reasoning section is even a section in the UCAT. We're then going to look at some tips for you to perform better, and then we're going to practice some questions in real time. So at the moment, how confident are you in the quantitative reasoning section? So a bit of a varied response.
Okay, this is interesting. We'll see if the responses are as varied or whether they homogenize later on as well.
So moving on, what aspect of quantitative reasoning do you find most challenging? This is just so we can get a better idea of what you guys struggle with the most, and maybe we can tailor our tips towards that. Timing. So this comes up, I think, every session. Just the time pressure of the UCAT exam in general for every single section is pretty hard. And unfortunately, quantitative reasoning isn't one of the better timed sections. Okay, yeah, GCSE math, since you don't do it for A-level.
Another component that students can tend to struggle with is the mental maths aspect of it, especially when at A-level maths, for example, they're used to just using a calculator. And although, of course, you do have the calculator there, being able to take those arithmetic shortcuts and do them in your head will help to speed things up.
The can't tell questions using the calculator, definitely, I understand that. And the only way you can be better with using the calculator, it's a horrible calculator. It's so old, like no one uses calculators like that anymore. But the only way you can get over that is by practicing and using the calculator again and again. Dealing with long stimulus questions and table type questions, yeah, I understand all of these. Just when to skip the hard ones. Okay, so we can address all of this throughout the session. I'm sure our tips will help with this. And again, if you have any other further questions that you think we haven't answered, we have our audience Q&A session at the end. So let's learn more about the quantitative reasoning section. You have 36 questions in 24 minutes, which gives you around 40 seconds per question. So unfortunately, this isn't the best timed section. But if you use stuff like mental math, if you become more familiar and comfortable with the calculator, you can definitely save a lot of time on these questions. And the section focuses on testing your numerical problem-solving abilities. I want to highlight the word problem-solving. And thus involves evaluating numerical data sets by answering multiple choice questions. This is from the next thing that I'm about to say is from the UCAT website, where they address the problem that students, may not have taken maths at A-level, and the last time they did math was at GCSE, and maybe they've forgotten things. One of the things that they've mentioned is definitely revise your GCSE math, because anything that they ask is just at GCSE math level, not more than that. You don't need math in A level. But they also did say that the focus of this section is problem solving rather than pure math. So keep that in mind when you're solving your questions. You need a very basic mathematical understanding, but the focus is on problem solving, not on making you do hard calculations. It's just trying to make you think, what calculation do I need to do? That's the hard part. And once you know what equation to use, what formula to use, what operation to do, then it becomes easy because you have a calculator. So it's just about the thinking and the process of figuring out what to do rather than how to do it, if that makes sense.
I completely echo what Arisma just said there. It's really about, like Arisma said, choosing what you're actually going to do rather than the actual calculation itself.
Yeah, and the last thing is that the questions will include use of graphs, charts, shapes, and tables with data, which can be a little bit intimidating, especially if you need to scroll down to look at the whole table. But trust me, they're not. That's just there to confuse you. And I have put some table questions, and I did put a question that seemed very confusing and intimidating to me at first. But when I tried the question, it was super easy. So maybe we can practice those today so that, everyone becomes a little less intimidated. And they may also include percentages, fractions, decimals, and ratios. So these are all topics that you might want to revise from GCSE Math for your quantitative reasoning exam. Now, question types, most questions will be shown as sets of 4 questions, each connected to the exact same data, usually a table. And there are some questions that are standalone, do not share any data. Each question has 5 answer options. So keep in mind, in all other sections, it's 4 answers. So if you guess, you have a 25% chance of getting it right. But in this section, it's 5. So your chance of getting it right is only 20%. So that's something to remember. And a simple answering calculator is available for you to use in this section. You may also need to use your whiteboards and pen. So that's it for the first objective. We're now going to look at the purpose of the quantitative reasoning section. And first, we want to know your thoughts. Why do you think this section is important? So as we've mentioned in all of our previous sessions, what do admissions officers look for? If you've done well in the quantitative reasoning section, what does that say to them? How does that prove to them that you're going to be a good medical student or a good doctor? Definitely, medical prescriptions, drug charts, calculating doses, that all require some basic math, preferably mental math, because you're going to have to be doing that the whole day. So that's correct. And medicine involves a lot of problem solving. Again, remember how the focus of this section is problem solving. So that's very important as well. Drug calculations, as I said. Okay, I think that's good. That's pretty much it. And let's go and check out what we said. So doctors will often need to make calculations in their daily work, and this includes calculating medication doses and when carrying out research. So in order to understand and, more importantly, critically analyze results and data analysis section of medical research in medical papers, doctors need a strong background in statistics. So is this paper that I'm reading, is it even statistically significant? Is this practice something that I should start in my own work, in my own hospital? And you'll have to statistically analyze the relevance of that paper. The third thing is, and this is the same as decision making, and that is problem solving needs to be done in high stress situations, which the UCAT replicates by giving you very little time to finish the exam. And problem solving also needs to be done while assessing and analyzing multiple sources of information, graphs, charts, data lists, so on, again, which happens in the UCAT. So again, zooming through these objectives, we're now going to look at some tips to perform better in the quantitative reasoning section. So our first tip is read the question slowly and extract only relevant information. Many times, especially in the quantitative reasoning, they want to overwhelm you and they want to confuse you. So they'll give you lists and lists of information, all of which may not even be important. Like they'll give a whole backstory about this man who goes to work here and then he has to pay tax, but all of that is irrelevant. You just need to look at how much he earns and what the taxable percentage is. So extract only relevant information, because remember, you have 40 seconds per question.
Yeah, and linking back to what Arisma was saying in terms of its importance, it's the same critical skill of synthesizing information, of being able to prioritize information, know what's relevant, and then know what to do with that information as well. So it's the same skill that they're testing, of this synthesis of information, whether that be in your verbal reasoning or whether it be in your other subsections as well. Of course, here it's just looking and assessing your ability to synthesize information of a quantitative nature instead.
And I think that's so important because that really shows you how the entire UCAT exam is linked. All of the sections are linked because there are certain skills that every single section tests. So for example, checking how you handle high stress situations is something that every section tests because of your time pressure, but also synthesizing information and extracting relevant information. That's also a skill that every single section tests. And these are all important qualities that you need as a doctor, which again links to your personal statement and your interview. Keep in mind that if this exam is testing those skills, the medical schools want you to have those skills. So show them that you have them through the exam, through your personal statement, through the interview. The next tip is to not forget conversions and units. So if they've asked the question in a particular unit, make sure that the unit in the answer is correct. You might have to convert from one unit to another. All of that is extremely important. I'm not going to go into details of what the conversions are because I have a graphic on the next slide for that. That's taken from our UCAT guide, which you can find on our website. I've put the link on the next slide as well. It's a massive document with tips, more about each of the sections, the timings, worked examples, all of that. So that's definitely something very useful to check out, and it's completely free as well. So I've put the link on the next slide, and when we send out the presentation, we'll put it as a hyperlink so you can immediately go and check out the UCAT guide. Another tip is use the drawing board and the on-screen calculator. The drawing board is very nice to use. Just keep in mind that it's pretty small. It's an A4 sized drawing board, so you'll have to keep erasing it. So maybe practice writing small on it. But on-screen calculator, definitely, it'll take some time to get used to. And in our UCAT guide, we have a whole host of shortcuts that you can use in your exam, keyboard shortcuts. And there are some for the calculator as well, to like save a number in the memory of the calculator, unsave it, all of that stuff. So check out our UCAT guide for that. Revisit GCSE math topics. Again, this is taken from the UCAT website. They really encourage you to revisit GCSE math. So maybe open an old textbook or ask a younger friend to, lend a textbook. Just go through the common GCSE math topics, probability, percentage, ratio, decimals, fractions, all of that stuff. Now, this is a tip that's never going to leave any of our sessions or any of our presentations, and that's flag, don't panic, and move on. So if you can see yourself taking maybe more than a minute and a half on one question only, then it might be very useful to just flag it and skip, and in the last minute or two, come back and guess the answers. Rounding off is your best friend. So what do I mean by that? Sometimes calculations that you need to do may involve lots of decimals. Now, keep in mind, it also takes a long time to type out these numbers into the calculator. So if you want, you can just round off these decimals or even the numbers. So if you have, say, 3897, you can always round it off to 3900. So round off these numbers so that your calculations become easier. And once your calculations are easier, you can just choose the answer that was the closest. Now, one thing to keep in mind with rounding off is that look at the answer choices first. If the answer choices are really close to each other in terms of their numerical value, if they're really close to each other, do not round off, because if you round off, you'll get a wrong answer because the answers are so close to each other. But if they're pretty far apart, then rounding off works perfectly and saves you a ton of time. So our next tip is to learn important formulae and practice your mental math. Again, some important formulae I've put on the next slide, but practicing your mental math can be useful because, as we've said, using the calculator is arduous. And instead, if you can just do some mental math in your head, that might save you some time, especially really basic stuff. And of course, our last tip, again, it's going to be in all of our sessions, but practice, practice, practice. For this section, obviously, you need to practice the question types, you need to practice doing your math, but you also need to practice using the calculator. So practice is especially important with this section, and it's especially important to do your practice online using the exact same calculator that you're going to get in the UCAT exam.
Using the same format is, of course, not only beneficial for the reasons we outlined, but it's also the solution to loads of questions that we get asked in terms of How do you lower your stress in the UCAT exam? How do you cope with timed pressure environment? It really comes down to practicing under timed conditioning and matching the same format as the exam. And just purely by that learning and continuous practice on it, that will benefit you not only in terms of course, your overall performance, in terms of your stress, and also in terms of your timing as well.
Yeah, I think Yusuf said that perfectly. And so very quickly okay. So here are the two graphics that I've picked up from our UCAT guide. So some important conversions and some important formulae. And this is the link to our UCAT guide, which I think Yusuf could send it in the chat right now. And we'll
Sure
also put
thing.
it as a hyperlink in the presentation when we send it across. So that brings us to the end of the third objective. And now we're just going to focus on practicing questions for the next 30-40 minutes. And we're then going to move on to the audience Q&A section. So the first type of question that I've put is it's the 4 questions with the exact same data type question. So the grouped ones. So Bill has an annual taxable income of $28,950, and you have to calculate the tax he has to pay. So in this question, look at the table definitely, but also look at this statement because this is giving you some very important information. And I think we'll give everyone 1 minute from now to answer the question. Okay, we have 7 responses, so we're going to check the answers. Okay, so I expected this, some varied answers. So the correct answer is $3,895. But I completely get why you would have gotten other answers. The first time I was doing this question, I was pretty confused too. Now we can go through the question. So Bill has an annual taxable income of $28,950. So that puts him in the second category, right? So the annual taxable income bracket of $8,950 to $36,250. So what I'm going to try to do is go to the previous slide so you can see everything together. So he's in this bracket, right? And now that's why I also mentioned keep this statement in mind, because they said an annual taxable income of 60,000. So that person would fall into this category. They would pay 25% of 60,000 minus 36,250, but they would pay the extra 4,990, not the number that's found in the same row. They pay the extra money from the previous row, which I found really strange. I don't know why that happened, but that's just the way they want you to do the calculation. And if you didn't read the statement, you would probably do the 25% of 60,000 minus 36,250, but add the 17,000 to it. So that's something very important to keep in mind. Read everything, read the table, and read the statement at the end, because if they've given it, there's probably something important in it. So now if we start our calculations, he has a taxable income of $28,950. And so we do 28,950, and you need to subtract the first number, which is 8,950. That leaves you with 20,000, and you need to find 15% of that, which is 3,000. And then you pay another bit of tax from the previous row, which in this case is $895, which leaves you with 3,895. So that's the correct answer. These answers also definitely would have made sense. I think maybe you would have gotten one of these answers if you added the extra tax from the same row and not from the previous row. But that's fine because you've now read the final statement, and now you can keep this information in mind when we go through the next few questions, which involve data from the same table.
The one thing to add, Arisma explained it really well. You can also almost double check your answer and just think, is it roughly in the same scale that it should be? And the way to have a look is look at the table and see that the top tax paid in that whole bracket is 4,990. So therefore, you know that it's not going to be that higher offer or higher tax of 5,237. So you can use that to help you scale and see roughly what ballpark are we looking at.
Yeah, I think that's such a useful tip because if there were more options above 4,990, you could just immediately cross them off and you wouldn't have to, maybe you would just be left with 1 or 2 options, which makes life so much easier. So moving on to the next question. Corey has an annual taxable income equivalent to $2,500 per month. And she wants to save enough money each month to pay her tax for the year. How much does she need to save in a month? So we're going to give you another minute. Keep in mind, units are very, very important in this section. We're going to check the answer. But I have been noticing in quantitative reasoning specifically, I think a lot of people's timing is much worse than in the other sections. So it might be, useful to specifically practice more of this section and specifically focus on your timing, because I understand that this is a hard section, especially this question with so much data and information in a table, but timing is very, very important. And that's something I think everyone will have to practice for this section. Okay, so this is good. 50% of you have gotten the correct answer, and that's 338. So let's look at why that's the answer. So the reason why I mentioned that units are super important is because they mentioned that Corey has an income of $2,500 per month, but this is the annual taxable income bracket. So first we need to find out how much Corey makes in a year, which is 2,500 into 12, which gives you $30,000 per year. That's the first thing that you need to do. And now they say that she wants to save enough money for each month to pay her tax for the year. So we need to find her annual taxable income, see how much tax she needs to pay in the entire year, then convert it into a monthly, installment, and then find the answer. So if she earns $30,000 per month, she falls into the second bracket, and we need to find the difference between 30,000 and 8,950. That gives you $21,050. Okay, so you do 15% of that, and then you add $895. So the total you get is $40,052. And now that's how much tax she has to pay in the entire year. But what if they asked us? They've asked us how much Corey needs to save each month. So you then go and divide that by 12, and the answer you get is $337.7. But they've also asked us to find the answer to the nearest dollar, which means no decimal points. And so that rounds up to $338, which is the correct answer. So we're going to move on to the next question now. We're going to give you guys a minute, and I'll announce when the minute is over. Of course, we can wait if people need more time, but I think announcing when 45 seconds are over and a minute is over will give you some sense of how much time you're taking in these questions and how much practice you need. So your minute starts now. Okay, so we're now going to check the answers. I think this is getting better and better. Your timing is also increasing with this question. A lot of you had answered within 1 minute, and more of you have gotten the answer correct. So the correct answer is 13.8%. So let's look at why that is. So Omar has a taxable income of $36,250 per year, which you can see is in this second bracket. So our first step is to find the difference between $36,250 and $8,950. And we then find 15% of that, and then we add $895 to it. So the total tax that Omar needs to pay you should have gotten $4,990. That's the tax that he needs to pay. But we need to find out what percentage of his taxable income does Omar pay in tax. So what percentage of his total income is the tax? We know the tax, that's $4,990, and we know how much he earns, which is $36,250. So we simply divide 4,990 by 36,250. Yeah. And then if you multiply that decimal by 100, you should get 13.76. And they asked us to correct it to one decimal place. So 13.76 rounds up to 13.8%, which is the correct answer. So I am aware that I'm doing the calculations on my phone. So if it is slightly confusing for you guys, let me know. Maybe I can show you my calculations on the screen if that might help. So just let me know in the chat box. And I think this is the last question maybe of this section. But the question is that the values at the bottom endpoints and the top endpoints, so this income bracket, so 0 to 8,950, 8,950 to 36,250, those endpoints are increasing by 10%. What would be the change in income to the nearest dollar after tax has been deducted of a person with a taxable income of $36,250. This is where your whiteboard comes in handy, because in the previous question, we had to find out how much Omar paid in tax when his income is $36,250. So you already know how much Omar pays in tax because you calculated that in the previous question. So in this question, you have to see the difference in income, the difference in income after tax has been deducted, and you've already calculated the tax before this 10% increase. So you don't even need to do that calculation again. So all of these questions are linked, and sometimes when you look at these linked questions, a previous question's answer might be handy in a future question. So that's why keep your whiteboard handy and write pretty small so that you have all of your calculations there. I'm now going to start the timer for a minute and let's see the answers. And just a little clue to help you guys out. If you didn't note down how much tax Omar was paying, he earns $36,250 and his tax was $4,990. So if you had a whiteboard, that should have been noted down, but in case you didn't, that's the tax that he used to pay. So keep that information in mind when you're answering this question, and you should be faster then. So I think we're going to check the answers now. Okay, wide range of answers. So the correct answer is that it's a $45 increase. And let's look at why that's the answer. So here's a quick explanation of why the correct answer is an increase of $45 in the spendable income. So the first thing that the question told us was that the endpoints, both the bottom and top endpoints, were going to increase by 10%. So to increase our bottom endpoint of 8,950, we need to find 110% of that value, and that is 9,845. However, if you read the question carefully, you'll realize that the flat value, the flat amount of money that you need to add on top of the percentage tax that you calculate is actually 10% of the lower value. So in this case, instead of adding $895, you now have to add 10% of our new bottom endpoint, which is $9,845. 10% of that is $984.5. So essentially, what does this mean? We're going to find 15% of whatever his income is, and then the value that we need to add is no longer $895, but instead it's $984.5. Now his income is $36,250, and we've been asked to find out how much tax he pays. So the first step in calculating tax is subtracting the bottom endpoint from the person's income. So that's $36,250 minus $9,845. That leaves us with $26,405. We then find 15% of that. That gives us $3,960.75, and now we need to add that flat rate to it, which we calculated to be $984.5. So the total tax that he's now paying is $4,945.25. When we compare this with the previous tax he was paying, which we got from the last question about Omar, we know that the previous tax before this 10% increase of endpoints was $4,990. So to calculate the change in his taxable income, instead of subtracting tax from his total income, we can just subtract the tax itself because his income isn't changing. So when we subtract his new tax, $4,945.25, from his previous tax before the endpoints were raised, which was $4,990, we get $45.25, which is the correct answer. Now, we've noticed that tax is decreasing after this increase in endpoint by 10%, but since tax is decreasing and since we're subtracting the tax, this means that more money is left for him to spend and there is an increase in spendable income. Now, the question asked us how his income has changed, and therefore it's a $45 increase, not a $45 decrease. However, if the question was asking us about the change in tax he paid, the answer to that would be a $45 decrease. That was a bit of a long question. So the next few questions, though, are just individual questions. So I'm going to give you guys a minute for this. So I'm now going to check the answers. Great. Most of you have gotten the correct answer, and that's 5. So let's look at how to attempt this question. So in her second year at university, Linda scored 99 points in P5. So she has multiple projects, P1 through 5. And in P5, she scored 99. What is the difference between her P5 score in the second year and the average project score in the first year? So these are her first year marks, and we need to find the average of that. So it's a fairly simple question. You just need to be able to read the graph. So in her first year in P1, she got 98. She then got 92, 97, and 89. So to find an average, you add up all the scores and then divide it by how many projects there were. So that's 376 divided by 4. So her average in first year was 94, and Linda scored 99 points in P5. So the difference is 5, which is the correct answer. So another independent question. If both the coins are made of only nickel and copper, what is the difference between the weight of copper present in coin B and the weight of copper in coin A? And that's a minute, and most of you have answered. So I'm going to check the answers. Okay, that's great. So most of you have gotten the correct answer. That's 0.675 grams. So this question is fairly straightforward, and most independent questions are like that. They are straightforward. So spend a lot of time, as we've said in previous sessions, be strategic about which question types you're good at. These question types have less data and often take less time. And in this question, the only limiting factor that determines how fast or slow you're going to do with the question is how fast or slow you use the calculator, because it's just some basic calculations that you need to do. So let's quickly just go through them. They're asking for the difference in the weight of copper. So we can figure out the percentage of copper, which is just a simple 100 minus 25, 100 minus 16. So if we do that for coin A, 75% of 6.5 should be the weight of copper in coin A, which is 4.875 grams. You write that on your whiteboard, and then you do the same with coin B. 100 minus 16, that's 84% of 5, and that's 4.2. On your whiteboard, you'd seen 4.875, I think. Yeah, 4.875 was the weight of copper in coin A. 4.2 was the weight of copper in coin B. Simple subtraction, you get 0.675 grams. So it literally just depends on how fast or slow you can use the calculator, and that determines how well you do in this type of question. I think we'll do this as the last question. This was originally a grouped question, but I've only put the first, question here just because I thought this graph was kind of complicated, and I wanted to show you guys that graphs are not intimidating and you can do these types of questions. So I'll send this picture on the WhatsApp group as well, and I'm going to start your 1-minute timer now. So we're going to go and check the answers. Okay, this is good. So 67% of you got the correct answer, and that was 50%. So let's go back to the table. Now, what is the question? Oh, sorry, that was the next question. Okay, so the question is asking us that the percentage of people entitled to vote who actually did vote in April was... Now, I know this table looks very complicated, very intimidating. It took me a couple of minutes to even figure out what was happening, but the information that they've given at the bottom is pretty useful. So by reading across, you can see the number of voters supporting a party in April, and by reading vertically, you can see the same numbers for September. But this question is just asking about April, so let's just focus on that. Now, how many people were entitled to vote? That's the first question. And you can just figure that out by using April totals, right? So these are how many people voted for Party A in April, Party B, Party C, and the number of people who did not vote. All you need to do is add up these 4 numbers, because these are all the people who either did vote or did not vote, but these are all the people who were eligible to vote in April. So that's 540, 520, 440, and 1,500, which gives you 3,000. And the question is, so we know that 3,000 people were entitled to vote in April, and how many people actually did end up voting? So you can see that the number of people who did not vote was 1,500. So without even having to add these up, you know that the number of people who therefore voted were 1,500. So 1,500 divided by 3,000, that's 50%. But you can find all of these questions on the UCAT website. These are questions taken from their question bank, and you can definitely practice all of these. And that brings us to the end of the content for today's session. We're now just going to go through the audience Q&A, get some feedback, and we can answer any specific questions that you may have. And I hope you learned something from this session. I hope it was useful. So how confident are you in the QR section now? I think we had a couple 1s and 2s last time, and I'm happy that they've at least gone to 3s and 4s. Wow, we have 7 of you. So it's a 3.4, which is really good. And as I've said, practice with the calculator, and that, confidence should go up.
So it's definitely more homogeneous now than last time. So absolutely practice, practice, practice.
And if you could just rate today's session. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much.
Great. So our first question is, how do you cope with the stress of the exam? So the first thing to say is, in the preparation for the exam, you want to ensure that you're making the format as close as possible to the real thing. And when you're doing it under timed conditions, for example, that will help you and minimize that stress. Of course, we all get some stress, but it's exactly the same as any other exam. And therefore, it's the same things that we'll be talking about in terms of ensuring you're hydrated, ensuring you had a really good night's dinner the night before, as well as a really solid breakfast, alongside sleep, alongside just being able to talk about it as well. And I think that helps. But we'll also be able to talk a bit more about that later on as well.
How many whiteboards do we get given? Because I heard you can't rub out your working. Would 3 be enough? From what I remember, I think I got... Yeah, so I'm just now remembering that I got a permanent marker. I did not rub out my working, and I got a couple of A4 sheets, and I could ask the lady, the proctor, for more sheets. She didn't like not give them to me or anything. I think I got a booklet with like maybe 5, and I think I needed 1 or 2 more because I write pretty big. So she just gave me more. That's not a problem. You don't need to worry about how much would be enough. I think you get how much ever you want.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of knowing how much you'd use, again, practicing, just seeing how much it is, you'll get more used to writing small as well. To be honest, this isn't by any means a major concern, and it's quite a minor thing, to be honest. It's something just through practice that you'll get better at.
And how accurate are the Medify mocks to the actual exam? I think we get this in like every other session, but Medify is really good at, replicating the test environment. So it's online, it uses the same calculator, the same shortcuts, all of that. So it's pretty nice in that way. In terms of the questions, I've heard very varied responses because the UCAT exam itself is not standardized. So one day, maybe the quantitative reasoning section was harder than the verbal reasoning, and another day, maybe another section is harder, right? So every time I've spoken to anyone, a lot of my friends used Medify, and anytime I spoke to anyone, for example, I said that the Medify quantitative reasoning mocks were easier than the quantitative reasoning section that I actually got in my exam. But for a bunch of other people, they found the QR section in Medify harder, and that's just because every day, or like every couple of days, the UCAT exam itself changes. So there's no actual way of measuring that accuracy. There's also 8 different mocks, and each mock has a different level of difficulty in Medify. So there's no way of actually determining that. I think Medify is useful if you want something that mimics the environment of the exam. But for accuracy of any mock, for that matter, I don't think anyone can really comment on it.
Yeah, I'd echo what Arisma has already said. There are 2 really factors why. So one, because of the fact that nobody, and it's impossible to exactly replicate the UCAT questions themselves if you're not a UCAT examiner. It's just not going to be possible to do. And secondly, because the difficulty of it, again, there's absolute versus relative difficulty, and what may appear to be hard and actually is hard in a UCAT exam would of course be scaled. So the difficulty actually doesn't really matter, because what matters is how well you do relative to the other cohort. So because of those 2 factors, it's really hard to tell, and all we can say is keep on practicing, and you will still realize, and you can still use it as a metric to see if your UCAT ability is staying roughly same, if it's improving, and if it's plateauing. And when it starts to plateau slightly, that's the time to really do your UCAT exam. So because of course you get diminishing returns after a while of preparation. So you can still use it as a relative form, but you can't use it as an exact gold standard.
Yeah, I think Yusuf said that perfectly. So just before we end today's session, I just wanted to talk about some of our new services, which you also would have gotten in the newsletter. So our personal statement review service has started, and you can check it out on the personal statement page on our website. And you can also now book a free consultation with one of our tutors for 30 minutes. You can talk about your application, any questions, any doubts you have, and someone will be there from the organization to help you with that consultation. And as usual, here's our website. So you can find a bunch of services there. Our UCAT guide is also on the website. And we have a new page called the Choosing Universities page, which just lists out a bunch of factors, a bunch of things to keep in mind when you're picking your final 4 medical schools to apply to, which is something that you might have to start thinking about now that it's August almost. So you can check out those pages. And as usual, in the weekly newsletter, we'll update you on anything new that we have. But that's it from our side for today. And I hope this session was useful and helpful. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join this session.
Excellent. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.